Hello everybody, my name is Claudia Sehl, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Waterloo, and I'm coming to you all the way from Canada. There's a beautiful picture of Canada. Okay, let's see if I can get this going. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking to you about children's developing evaluations of efficiency. So there's this comic called The Family Circus that you may or may not have seen, and in these comics there's this character named Billy. And Billy is shown navigating various environments to get to his goals, and he's shown taking this path along this dotted line, and he takes these really long and circuitous paths to get to his goals. And these comics are really entertaining and funny and captivating for adults and children alike, mainly because it's fun to see the path that he took, but also because it defies our expectation that people take direct and efficient paths towards their goals. And what's funny about this particular comic is he says that his way is the shortcut, and as we can tell, it's anything but the shortcut. So what do we know about how people reason about efficiency? Well, there's quite a few papers in the infant literature, and we've seen this quite a few times over the last couple days, but I'll be the one to fully explain it. So in this study, 12-month-olds in this habituation study were shown this event where there was this agent who jumped over a wall to get to their goal. And they saw this event over and over and over again until they were habituated to it. And after, there were these two test outcomes. And in both, there was no longer a barrier. So the agent either took the same jumping path as before, or they went directly towards their goal. And infants looked longer at this jumping event. Even though that action is the thing that they had seen before, they still find this event surprising because there's no barrier in the way. So as adults, we would kind of say this as, we wouldn't expect agents to put in more costs than necessary to get towards their goals. And there have been quite a few paradigms now showing that infants can infer the goals and constraints that the agent is facing based on this principle of efficiency. But really, I think that there's much less work on this in children. I don't think it's been directly tested whether children predict efficient paths or how they might evaluate actions based on its efficiency. But there certainly are exceptions, so I'm not saying that too strongly. So in one study, 3 to 6-year-olds were shown a character who had to get to their goal, and they had to predict which way they would take to get to the goal. So here, the farmer has to get to his barn. He can take the short path or the long path. And so when children are making these predictions, they might be considering something like efficiency, or they could consider other things. They might think that he will take the long and winding path because it's more fun or interesting. So there's a lot of different things that kids could be thinking about when making this prediction. But around age 5, children predict that he will take the shorter path. So this could provide some evidence that children are reasoning about efficiency. They might think that he'll take this path to minimize the costs towards his goal. But I also think it's possible that children are relying on kind of a lower level or more rudimentary kind of line of reasoning where they're simply just preferring this path because it's shorter without even reasoning about costs at all. So I think it's important to look at other test conditions that tease between these two accounts. And I'll also just quickly mention that there are also oh, I lost my mouse here. There's also other studies that rest on the idea that children understand this principle of efficiency, so this maximizing rewards and minimizing costs. But I don't think that these paradigms directly test children's evaluations of efficiency. And they also test children at relatively older ages, so ages 5 and 6. So what are the younger children doing? So we wanted to test the simplest judgments about efficiency, just like the paths in the infant scenarios. So if children see these kinds of actions, can they evaluate which kid did better? Do they know that the middle kid was really inefficient? And do they know that the kid on the two ends here are relatively efficient? So in this talk, I'm going to present studies where I had children compare which of two characters did a better job, and I had them make different kinds of comparisons. And I'm going to be completely honest, when we started this work, we had other ideas in mind of what we wanted to actually test. And so we just ran these studies just to check that children could make these evaluations, but they're surprisingly not that great at it, and they're they're only making these evaluations later in development than we would have expected. So across experiments, I showed children trials like these, where there were two characters who wanted to reach their goal. In this particular study, I tested 3 and 4-year-olds. So I told them, look, here are 2 boys, they have to get to their backpacks. And look, they got to their backpacks. So which kid did a better job? And so for my whole talk, I'm going to put the correct answer on the left side. So as adults, we know that the character on the left would have done better. And children share this intuition around age 3 and 4. There's no affected age here. Children are saying that the kid who took the straight path did better. And as I've already alluded to, we don't really know whether this reflects a basic or simpler preference for shorter or straighter paths, or whether it really is reflecting this idea that they know that it's better to minimize cost towards your goals. And admittedly, this is just a replication of what I had already kind of told you, but we did show an earlier competency. So I'll tell you about the other trial type. In this one of the characters was faced with constraints, and they each got to their goal. And then children were asked which kid did a better job. And so this test trial is kind of interesting because if you were operating based on this kind of preference for shorter or simpler paths, you would say that the kid on the left did a better job. But if you were fully balancing the costs and the constraints in the environment, then you should be saying, or you should be choosing between them at chance, because they're both relatively efficient given their environment. And what we find is that while younger children are choosing between them at chance, 4-year-olds are saying that the kid who went straight did a better job. And so it's kind of some evidence for this basic explanation that I've been alluding to. But you could say this isn't really a good test. These are really little kids, and we're showing them 2 characters who took 2 different paths and are faced with 2 different environments. So you're kind of weighing this efficiency with this one, and you got to weigh between them, so maybe that's difficult. So I tested this possibility in the next experiment, and then I also expanded the age range to include 5 to 7-year-olds. So I first replicated this no constraint trial, and here we find that at age 4, children are selecting the character who took the straight path. So again, we don't fully know what this might reflect, but might be efficiency. In the other trial type, we again have a character who took a long and winding path, but this time we're comparing him to a character who also took a long and winding path, but he had constraints in his way. So this trial type is really great because if you're operating based on this idea that you should always select the shorter path, you should be choosing between these at chance because they took the exact same path. But if you really are understanding costs relative to constraints and the rewards in the environment, you should say that the kid who went around the rocks did a better job. And what we find, this is the real surprising finding for me, even up until their 8th birthday, children are choosing between these 2 characters at chance. So that's kind of speaking against, again, the idea that children are weighing costs and constraints in the environment. So I'm going to describe one last experiment, and it's a slight change of direction. It steps a bit away from the typical comparisons that I've been showing you. So far I've been showing you kind of scenarios that we had already seen in the infant paradigms, right? There's a character who goes straight, one that kind of jumps or goes around for no reason, or one who takes the longer path for a reason because of their constraints. So this experiment is going to have slightly different comparisons. So in this experiment, we compared 2 different trial types. So in the first, I'm going to call it all collected. It's not a great label, but we'll use it for now. We have 2 characters who can collect all the flowers in the field. One of them takes an efficient path, and he does this by always collecting the flower that is closest to him wherever he is in the field. And then the other character is inefficient because he's always collecting the flower that's furthest from him in the field. And why I like this test trial is because in all the previous comparisons I've shown you without constraints, the short path is also a straight path. And so this experiment, in a sense, kind of steps away from a potential confound of these previous studies. But by and large, again, by age 4, children know that the kid on the left did a better job. And then in the final comparison I'm going to show you today, the two characters, again, could collect flowers in the field, but this time they could only collect 3. And so if you were efficiently navigating the space, you should just collect the 3 that are closest to you. One of the characters does this and the other one doesn't. So the one on the right, she passes 3 of them on her way to get ones further from her. And this is an interesting comparison because, again, if children are operating based on which path is longer without reasoning about costs, they should be choosing between these at chance. And what we find is that at age 5, children know that the kid on the left did a better job. And so they can kind of reason about the location of the rewards and the character's path. Okay. So far, that's it for the experiments, but so far I've been touching on 2 accounts this whole time and kind of weighing between them and trying to reason about what are kids thinking about while they're making these judgments. And I don't think that they're fully mutually exclusive accounts, but I'll go over some evidence for each, or I'll just review the evidence. So across all the experiments, we've shown repeatedly that when children see a short path and a long path, they choose the shorter one. So we don't really know if this is a full reflection of their understanding of efficiency or whether it's just a preference for shorter paths. And where we really see evidence for this preference for shorter paths is in the first experiment, where children should be choosing between these characters at chance level because they're both efficient, but they say that the one who took the short path did better. So that's a bit puzzling. If they were truly reasoning about efficiency, they wouldn't be doing this. And then this trial type spoke against the efficiency account because children should say that the kid who went around the rocks did a better job because he was as efficient as possible, but children didn't distinguish between the 2. But all is not lost because they did show some capacity to reason about efficiency because in this trial type, they did know that the character who got the ones closest to her did better. The one on the right really had no reason to go that way, so she, did a bad job. So it's really an open question regarding the developmental trajectory of these judgments. We know that infants are great at anticipating these kinds of actions, but it's only by age 4 that we find evidence that children can simply judge that shorter paths are better than longer ones. And by age 5, they're showing the first kinds of signs of reasoning about efficiency, but even by age 8, children can't really distinguish between these 2 actions, and if they truly understand efficiency, so rewards relative to their costs and their constraints, then they shouldn't be so bad at this trial type. And I think this trial is particularly puzzling because this consideration of constraints has been kind of shown in the infant literature. I think I'm running out of time, so I might just end it at that. But thank you so much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to your questions. There we go.
And it's time for questions.
Just a quick clarification, but
Yeah.
how well do the kids really understand that the dotted line represents the path that you're walking on? Is there some teaching at the beginning? I mean, do they?
No teaching, but I'm also not too worried about it because I've done a couple things to make sure that kids know what's going on. Mm-hmm. So I think in my first pilot of this, after I asked children to make their judgment, on the last slide, I'd ask them to explain which way each of the kids took, mm-hmm. and they're very often tracing. And so when I'm asking for explanations, they typically mm-hmm. point to the lines. And I also did another experiment that showed the paths with animations with mm-hmm. the dotted line, and the results come out the same. Yeah. So I have thought about that, but mm-hmm. I'm not too worried about it, but thanks.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, we were just looking for maybe students who would like to ask. No? Laura, I can't see. Could you please give it to Laura? Yeah.
I'm not a student, but almost. I have lots of questions, but I'll just ask one. How can you make sure that kids understand the prompt in the way that I assume you want them to understand it. So what do you think they make of did a better job? Because that seems to have many possible interpretations, and you know, there's many different ways, as you mentioned in the beginning, to solve a task. And it seems very open. Question.
Yeah, it is tricky. So I've thought a lot about this question, because if I give them anything more, I'm worried that I'm spoon feeding them the answer. So if I say, oh, the boys need to like get to their backpacks as quick as they can, you know, emphasizing this like efficiency is the metric that we're talking about, then I feel like I'm kind of nudging children to get to the answer. And so I was trying to keep like a really like broad evaluation, a broader judgment. That's one kind of answer to it. Another is I could imagine children kind of being stumped, because when I'm showing them like, oh, here are two boys, they have to get to their backpacks, maybe they're expecting that one of them won't make it. And so when they see them achieve their goal, maybe they're like, okay, so what am I judging here? So I have thought about that, but given the fact that we do see that children have a preference in a lot of these trials by age 5 and up, I think that there's a good understanding of what I'm asking them. But yeah, it's something to think about for the 3 and 4-year-olds for sure.
Yeah, it's just I'm asking because also in the infant studies, there's this finding that if they're acting inefficiently from the get-go, then babies just don't attribute the goal. So it might be that they're thinking, he's still doing something in a good way, whatever. It's just not getting to the goal in the most direct path. So anyway, we can.
Yeah, I guess we don't know anything about the characters and how, you know, whether they act efficiently or inefficiently, like Billy in the comic. Like, we don't really know. We don't have a background on them. So, but yeah, that's an interesting point.
Still have some questions?
Thanks so much for a great talk.
Thank
I'm
you.
curious about how and whether and to what extent children's expectations of others' efficiency map on with their own efficiency. So whether by age 4 they are also taking the most efficient paths to their goals or not.
It's an interesting question, because if you watch kids, you know, accomplish their goals, a lot of the time they can be really inefficient, especially like, I mean, it's different than walking paths, but children are really inefficient with their resources, right? Like, they waste tons of stuff all the time. And so you might think if children are using their own efficiency to make inferences about others, maybe that's why they're bad. But there are some infant studies that look at like how infants actually like crawl in environments, and they are like pretty efficient. And I think there is a pretty fundamental understanding about cost, that you don't want to put in more energy than necessary. And I feel like that would be like a pretty like early on kind of understanding. I don't know if that answers the question, but I'm just speculating.
Do you have time for just one short question? I'm giving.
I am over here.
Hi.
I have a really quick clarification question, maybe.
Okay.
Were the 2 pathways shown individually and then together, or were they shown at the same time?
Depends on the experiment. I've played around with it quite a bit. For the complicated paths where there's lots of flowers, it was all one at a time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So given that, would you think showing a dynamic, them moving both on the screen at the same time, given that speed is held relative, that they could then judge efficiency, seeing that one child would meet their goal faster than the other?
Yeah, so that's one way of doing it. I guess for me, when I tried that, I actually wasn't satisfied with if children were choosing the efficient one. It's like, oh, it's because I showed them. They didn't have to make an inference. It's who got to their backpack quicker. They don't even have to look at the path, right? So, I don't know if I'm fully satisfied with that solution, but it is an idea.
And maybe one last follow-up.
Yeah.
What if you habituated them to the movement action and then showed static images of the trajectory afterwards, so they know that speed is relative, and then they have the assumption of attaining the goal afterwards with just static pathway images?
That's a really interesting idea. I haven't thought about that. Maybe it could work. That could be something. And So also with these paths, you could consider efficiency with like the time, but you could also consider the effort. So that might get kids to think about time efficiency, but maybe not effort. So another thing to think about there, but that's a really great idea. Thank you.
Thank you so much.